Have you ever felt so lonely that the world around you seems to turn into a mirror, reflecting only the emptiness within you? That's the story of Arthur Vance, a billionaire who owned everything except his own voice. After a horrific accident, his life was plunged into a silence as cold as his luxurious penthouse. But then one day, at a familiar restaurant, a 6-year-old girl with big, honest eyes shattered that invisible wall with a simple sentence, "You look like the saddest rich man I've ever seen." So what happens when an innocent little girl touches the icy heart of a billionaire? Can his silent voice ever speak again, or will he be forever trapped in his own world? Join us to discover this moving journey where silence holds more power than any words. Arthur Vance lived in a world of silence, but it was not a peaceful one. It was the silence of a tomb, built of glass and steel, where the only sounds allowed to exist were the echoes of himself. 8 years prior, a car accident had stolen his voice, and with it, his passion for music. He had once been a talented pianist, a man who could make the keys of a Steinway sing with symphonies of emotion. Now he was just a billionaire, an architect of tech empires living in a penthouse where everything was perfectly arranged, but lacked a single bit of warmth. On a Thursday night, just like every other Thursday night, Arthur went to the restaurant Le Vrai. He chose his usual table in the secluded corner where he could observe everyone without being bothered. Everything here was a prearranged play. The waiter glided over with a rote smile, placing the menu and his familiar Merlot on the table without needing to ask. They had learned how to serve him silently, efficiently, and without a hint of curiosity. He sat there a solitary monument amid the clamor of life, staring at the untouched plate of pan-seared halibut. The lights glittered on his glass of red wine, but he felt none of its beauty. He only felt emptiness, a deep hole that no investment or billion-dollar deal could ever fill. Suddenly, a small, clear, but powerful voice broke through the wall of silence he had painstakingly built. "You look like the saddest rich man I've ever seen." Arthur looked up, startled. Standing before him was a little girl with neatly braided hair and a slightly oversized Sunday dress. Her large, bright eyes held no shyness or curiosity, but a terrifying honesty, as if she could see right through his perfect facade. He squinted slowly, signing with his hand, "I beg your pardon." He wasn't sure if the little girl would understand sign language, but reflex had taken over. "I said you look very sad," she repeated, her voice a little louder, unconcerned by the curious looks and whispers of the nearby diners. "And you're wearing a watch that's probably more expensive than my mom's car, so that makes you a sad rich man." Arthur blinked. He didn't sign back. He didn't write anything down. He just simply stared. He wasn't used to children talking to him. He wasn't used to anyone talking to him without pity, awkwardness, or calculation in their eyes. But this little girl was different. She was not afraid. She crossed her arms over her chest and tilted her head, as if she were studying a difficult puzzle. "You don't have anyone to eat with." A breath escaped Arthur's chest. He leaned back in his chair, picking up the notebook and pen he always carried. He scrawled, "Please leave me alone. I am eating." The little girl read it, wrinkled her nose, and replied, "That's kind of rude. My mom says people who eat alone all the time start to get a smell of silence." The phrase was like a punch to Arthur's chest. He nearly choked on the sip of wine he was drinking. A waiter rushed over, his voice filled with concern. "Lily, you can't disturb the customers." Arthur held up a hand, signaling for the waiter to stop. He signed decisively, but without anger. "She is not disturbing me." He felt a strange defensiveness well up inside him, a desire to protect this little girl from the conformity of the adults around them. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man with a flustered expression, hurried over. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. This is the daughter of one of our waitresses. I will take her back immediately." Arthur stood up abruptly. His tall stature and sharply tailored suit made the manager's apology stop in midair. He looked down at Lily, then at the manager, and picked up his pen once more. He wrote in his notebook one word at a time, strong and clear. "Let her talk. She is the only person who has said something honest to me all week." The manager hesitated for a moment. Of course, sir. I just didn't want to disturb your evening. Arthur signed decisively. You were disturbing me. She was not. Lily smirked, climbing into the chair opposite him as if it were her own throne. She reached for a breadstick. I'm Lily, she said, her mouth full. I'm 6.5. I know sign language because my mom couldn't talk for a while. She just had throat surgery. Arthur glanced toward the kitchen. A woman in her mid-30s was peeking through the swinging doors, her face pale and tense. He knew it had to be Lily's mother, Sarah. She looked ready to rush out and drag her daughter back by the ear. I like people who don't talk a lot, Lily continued, playing with the cloth napkin in her hand. They listen better. She looked him straight in the eye. You look like you have a lot to say, but nobody asks you. Arthur signed slowly. You talk too much for someone who likes silence. Lily grinned. My mom says that too. Arthur let out a small huff through his nose, a gesture that was almost a laugh. In that moment, the restaurant's noise seemed to disappear. All he heard was the movement of Lily's fingers, her small, unafraid voice, and her perceptive insight. It caught him off guard. It was unsettling, yet a part of him wanted to listen. I know who you are, she said matter-of-factly. You're the man who made that phone app that everyone yells at, but now you don't talk anymore. Arthur stiffened. Lily noticed. She frowned. Did I say something wrong? He shook his head. Then he picked up the pen and wrote slowly. Car accident, lost vocal cords, doctors tried. Didn't work. Oh, she said softly, finally falling silent. She crossed her arms. That's sad. Is that why you're grumpy? Arthur raised an eyebrow. Lily quickly explained, waving her hands. I don't mean bad grumpy, just like a grandpa grumpy, like you don't want any friends. Arthur tapped the pen against the notebook. Slowly he wrote, What makes you think I want a friend? Lily shrugged. People who don't want friends don't let a little girl sit and eat breadsticks at their table. Arthur stared at her. Then he slowly pushed the breadstick basket closer. From behind the kitchen doors, Sarah stepped out, a look of pure panic on her face. Lily, she called out sharply. Lily flinched in her seat. Oh no, I'm in trouble. Arthur stood up again, this time calmly, and signed towards Sarah. She's fine. She's not bothering me. Sarah's eyes darted between her daughter and the billionaire. Mr. Blake, I apologize. She doesn't know her boundaries. Arthur picked up his notebook again. She knows more about kindness than most adults. Let her finish her breadstick. Sarah started to argue, then fell silent. She looked at Lily, who was pleading with wide eyes. Sarah sighed, gave a small nod, and disappeared back into the kitchen, mumbling something under her breath. Lily leaned across the table, her arms crossed like a tiny CEO. My mom doesn't trust people like you. Arthur signed, a smart woman. But I do, she said. You're sad, not scary. That's different. Arthur felt a weight shift in his chest, a strange foreign feeling. Not happiness, not yet, but something warm, something alive. Lily slid off the chair. Okay, I have to go. If you're here next Thursday, maybe I'll bring my sketchbook. I draw faces. You have a very sad one, but I think I can fix it. She didn't wait for permission, just waved and skipped away, leaving behind a mess of breadstick crumbs and a single fragile thread of hope. Arthur sat down slowly, still staring at the kitchen door. He picked up his pen one last time and wrote something he hadn't written in years. That little girl might have been my first conversation in 7 years, and it wasn't bad at all. From that moment, Arthur Vance's world was no longer a place of empty silence. It had become a place of waiting, a place with hope and a silent promise. For the first time in years, he felt not just that he was surviving, but that he was beginning to live again. He had found an invisible connection, an echo of life hidden within his own silence. The Arthur Vance's silence was no longer a shield. It had become a space of waiting. He returned to Livray the following Thursday, not out of habit, but from a strange compulsion. He sat at his usual table, sipped his Merlot, and watched the restaurant's entrance. Each passing minute felt longer, more tense. He told himself he was there for the fish, for the quiet, but his eyes never stopped searching for a tight braid and a beaming smile. Lily wasn't on time. He opened his note-taking app, a gesture previously reserved for business, and wrote, Thursday, 6:46 p.m. No. Lily, no breadsticks to distract me. When he was on the verge of leaving, a movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. The little girl was back, an old, worn purple sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. Sarah, her mother, followed reluctantly, her face tense. Sarah approached Arthur's table as if walking toward a wild animal she didn't trust. She insisted on coming. Sarah said, her voice small and defensive. I told her it wasn't appropriate. Arthur pointed to the chair opposite him, the one Lily had sat in last week. Then he picked up his pen and wrote, If she has something to show me, I will listen. Sarah looked down at Lily, who gazed up at her with a radiant smile that made Sarah sigh in exasperated defeat. 1 hour, Sarah said. Then it's homework and no dessert. Deal, Lily chirped happily, climbing into the chair as if it were a throne. Arthur watched her with a sense of awe as she ceremoniously opened the sketchbook. The first page was a messy scrawl of a face with big eyes, a downturned mouth, and storm clouds over its head. She proudly turned it toward him. That's you from last week, she said. Arthur raised an eyebrow. How about this? She flipped the page. It was the same face, but with a small flower in the corner and a faint, hesitant smile. This is what I think you would look like if you had a friend. Arthur stared at the page, his lips barely moving. He signed, You are a wonderful artist. I know, she said simply. I want to be a therapist, but with pictures. Arthur typed a message on his phone and slid it across the table. You already are. Lily tilted her head, confused. It means you help people, Sarah gently explained from behind the chair. Even when you don't know it. For a brief moment, Arthur looked up at Sarah, and their eyes met without tension, without assumptions. But then Sarah turned away again, crossing her arms, shielding herself. He doesn't need us in his life, Lily. This isn't a fairy tale. Mom, Lily said with finality. He lets me talk and he listens. That's more than most grown-ups do. Sarah stiffened. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but you think he's broken. A heavy silence settled between them. Arthur looked at Sarah again, his expression unreadable. Then he slowly picked up his pen and wrote, I am broken, but not dangerous. Sarah read the words, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm not worried about him hurting her, she said. I'm worried she'll think she can fix him. Lily looked back and forth between the two adults, frowning. I'm not trying to fix him. I just think he's tired of being lonely. Arthur tapped the table twice. The sound was small, but it was enough to make Lily smile. He agrees, she said before flipping to another page. This time, it was a drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one with glasses and a frown. Arthur, a medium-sized one with curly hair and hands on her hips, Sarah, and a small one with a speech bubble that read hi in big block letters. Lily. She tapped the drawing with her pencil. This is what I want. We're friends, maybe family, like a team. Arthur looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he took a clean napkin and wrote, You have a vivid imagination, but I'm not sure I belong on a team. Lily leaned forward. Maybe you just haven't been picked for the right team yet. From behind, Sarah sighed. All right, Picasso, time's up. Lily pouted. Just 5 more minutes. Sarah glanced at Arthur, her eyes silently saying, This is getting too far. Arthur scribbled one last message on a napkin and passed it to Lily before she left. She opened it as she walked away. Her eyes lit up. Mom, he wants to see more drawings next week. Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked back at Arthur, who had returned to his meal, but his posture was different now, less rigid, less lonely. The next day, Sarah told herself she would talk to the manager about being moved to a different restaurant, one where her daughter wouldn't befriend billionaires. But she never made the call. Back in his penthouse, Arthur taped Lily's drawing to his refrigerator, right next to forgotten old blueprints and financial reports. The crayon sketch looked wildly out of place among the numbers and documents, but he left it there. He stood before it, glass of wine in hand, and whispered a soundless sentence into the empty room. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am tired of being lonely. A week later, Arthur arrived at Livray 15 minutes early. He sat at table 14, his back straight, his suit impeccable, but his eyes constantly scanned the entrance as if waiting for a train that might not come. Each passing minute felt longer. At exactly 6:45, Lily appeared holding her sketchbook like a precious trophy. She was wearing a red hoodie with sleeves that were too long and a wide smile that was brighter than the chandeliers on the ceiling. Sarah followed behind in her work apron and a look that showed she was still worried about all of this. When they reached the table, Arthur stood up. "You're early," Lily said, as if surprised he was capable of emotions like anticipation. Arthur gave a small smile, tapped his wrist twice to indicate the time, then signed, "Wanted to make sure I didn't miss her artwork." Lily slid into the chair and immediately opened the sketchbook. The first page was a drawing of Arthur at the restaurant, but now he had a thought bubble over his head filled with musical notes. "What is this?" he signed, curious. "That's you with music," Lily said. "My mom told me you used to play piano before the accident." Arthur's fingers froze. Then he signed slowly. "Yes, a very long time ago, before I stopped hearing my own voice." "Do you miss it?" she asked, not with pity, but with genuine concern. He nodded. Lily rummaged through her backpack and pulled out a small plastic toy piano, the kind children use in introductory music classes. Sarah, who was standing a few feet away, immediately stepped forward. "Lily, no," Sarah said sharply. "It's just for him to try again," Lily said quickly. "Even if it's just one note." Arthur looked at the piano, then at Sarah. Her jaw was set clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't say no. He reached out and pressed a key. A crisp C note rang out, followed by a low F. The sounds were small and toy-like, but his face softened. His fingers, once accustomed to the great Steinways, now moved over the cheap plastic keys with reverence. "Thank you," he signed. "This means more than you know." Lily beamed. "Music doesn't need words, just feelings. You still have that." For a while they sat together, Arthur tapping out simple chords, while Lily flipped through her drawings. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed, close enough to intervene, but not interrupting, until Mr. Garnett, the manager, approached them with a look of displeasure. "Ms. Washington," he said in a low voice, "I need a word with you privately." Sarah followed him toward the bar, whispering back and forth sharply. "They think I'm bothering you," Lily whispered to Arthur. Arthur frowned, glancing toward the bar. He took out his notebook, scribbled something, then stood up and walked directly to Mr. Garnett. Without a word, Arthur handed him the paper. Mr. Garnett read it, cleared his throat awkwardly, and muttered, "Of course, Mr. Vance. My sincerest apologies." When they returned to the table, Sarah looked confused. Arthur handed her the note he had written. "Your daughter is not a disturbance. She is the reason I come here." Sarah's defensive barrier dropped for a fleeting second. She looked at Arthur and said softly, "You don't owe us anything." Arthur replied in writing, "I know, but maybe I need something. Maybe I need to matter again." Sarah blinked in surprise, then gave a small nod and returned to the kitchen. After dinner, Lily rummaged in her backpack again. "I have a gift for you," she said, pulling out a folded piece of paper covered in crayon swirls. "It's a listening map, in case you forget how." He opened it. The paper had a path of colorful footprints leading from a stick figure Arthur to a small house labeled Our. Along the path were signs that read, "Smile, ask, listen, try again." And at the very end, "Speak loudly if you must, but be gentle when it matters." Arthur held the paper as if it were a sacred text. "Can I keep it?" he signed. "Of course," Lily said. "But I made a copy for me too. That way we're both learning." As she was about to leave, Lily said, "My mom said you probably wouldn't come back. She said people like you don't come back once they've been noticed." Arthur shook his head. He signed slowly. "Maybe before I didn't want to be seen, but now I do." Lily nodded. "Good, because you're getting better at being a person." She gave him a sudden bold hug. Arthur, stunned, at first slowly raised his hands and gently rested them on her shoulders. It was the first human contact he had allowed in years. When Sarah came to pick up her daughter, she looked more relaxed than usual. "She didn't bother you too much?" Arthur shook his head and signed. "She has reminded me what it's like to live." Sarah smiled a tired but genuine smile. "She does that to everyone." Arthur watched them leave, then returned to his silent penthouse. That night, with the toy piano in one hand and the crayon map in the other for the first time in years, he sat before his grand piano, the one that had been untouched since the accident. He placed the small toy piano on top of it, his fingers resting gently on both. And just for a moment, he played, not for the world, not for the media, not for his legacy, but for the little girl who had taught him that fingers could still sing. And somewhere in that quiet apartment, the music began to rise. After those magical Thursday afternoons, Arthur Vance's life had found a new rhythm. The silence in his penthouse was no longer a shield. It had become a space for him to rest and to reflect on Lily's smiles and her profound statements. He began spending more time at the grand piano, his fingers, once accustomed to running corporations, now fumbling to rediscover lost notes. But it was only with Lily by his side that the sounds truly had meaning. He bought a set of wood-carving tools and began to sculpt a small chair, a gift for his queen of breadsticks. He wanted to create something tangible, a symbol of the new connection he had found. It was a small, intricately carved chair with a backrest shaped like a miniature piano, representing the music that had returned to his life because of her. However, the brighter the light, the clearer the shadows become. Arthur's life had been free of threats for so long, not because they didn't exist, but because he had hidden himself too well. Now, as he stepped out of his cocoon of solitude, the ghosts from his past began to find their way back. They were not loud or sudden, but they infiltrated his life with subtlety. The first change came from the restaurant. The manager of Livray, Mr. Garnett, began to show his annoyance openly. He constantly tried to prevent Lily from coming to Arthur's table, giving fake complaints from other guests. One evening, as Lily was excitedly talking about a falcon friend she had drawn, Mr. Garnett approached the table holding a clipboard and wearing a serious expression. "Ms. Washington," he said in a cold voice, "I've received a few complaints. Other guests feel they are being disturbed. Perhaps it's time to end this arrangement." Arthur was no longer the silent, timid man of 8 years ago. He didn't just write on a piece of paper. He used sign language with a resolute, powerful, and authoritative force. His fingers moved quickly, sharp as a knife. "You can move her, or you can move me. But if you move me, I will buy this restaurant and fire you." Mr. Garnett turned pale. This threat was not just an empty promise. He knew Arthur had enough power to follow through. Arthur's determination made him back down, but the hatred in his eyes did not diminish. Arthur's silence was no longer a sign of weakness, but a deadly weapon. Mr. Garnett retreated, but Arthur knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. However, the real threat did not come from a restaurant manager's resentment. It came from a darker place, a past that Sarah had worked hard to conceal. One night, as Sarah was cleaning the bar, Arthur approached her, his face tense. He handed her a piece of paper. "What is it?" she asked. She had learned to read his emotions through his smallest gestures. Sarah hesitated. She knew that involving Arthur in her personal problems was a risk, but she also realized there was no other choice. "An old problem has come back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My ex, Lily's father, Derek." Arthur's breath caught in his chest. He had heard a name that had the smell of danger and deceit that Lily had sensed. "He was never really in her life," Sarah continued, clutching the cleaning rag in her hand. She talked about the lonely years, the hard work of raising her child alone. "But now he wants to be a father, not because he suddenly cares, but because he knows about you. He knows who you are." Arthur's jaw tightened. He signed, "Is he dangerous?" "Not in the way you think," Sarah said, her eyes welling up. "He's a manipulator. He knows how to twist things, how to make himself the victim. I've kept Lily safe for 6 years, and I will continue to do so." Arthur took the pen and wrote a firm response. "You do not have to do this alone." That night back in his apartment, Arthur's silence was no longer a peaceful sanctuary. It became a prison filled with words he wanted to scream but couldn't. He wasn't just angry, he felt a strong urge to protect. A man who had built tech empires, a man who was used to winning financial wars, now wanted to protect something more fragile than anything: a little girl with crayons and her courageous mother. He realized that, for the first time in years, he felt alive not because of money or power, but because of his responsibility to another person. He made a few calls, not to lawyers, but to Ethan, a former associate and private investigator. Ethan had discreetly helped him solve complex problems in the past. Their meeting took place at a quiet cafe. Arthur didn't speak. He handed Ethan a file. "Derek," Ethan said, flipping through the pages. "He has a not-so-clean criminal history: public disturbance fraud, but nothing that would land him in prison. Recently, he has been in contact with some gossip bloggers wanting to sell a story about you and Sarah. He's trying to create a scandal." Arthur tapped his fingers on the table, then signed, "Is there a way to stop him?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Legally, only if he crosses a line, but we can make him too busy to cause trouble." Arthur wrote something on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Ethan read it and smirked. "You want me to buy the company he works for?" Arthur nodded. "Subtle action." Ethan understood. "I'll handle it." But Derek was not just a regular con man. He was a ghost from the past, someone who could see other people's weaknesses. He started appearing near Lily's school. Sarah found this out by chance during a parent-teacher meeting when she saw a strange man standing in the corner, his eyes glued to Lily. Sarah immediately froze. Her throat tightened. Julian saw the change in her expression and acted immediately. He walked toward the man and signed, his eyes unwavering. His silence once again became a weapon. The man, sensing the danger, quickly left. That night, Julian opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photographs and letters from his deceased father. One of them was the only letter his father had ever sent him. He reread the words, which felt like a prophecy. "Arthur, the world will call you many names before it learns to listen to you. You will be misunderstood, as weak, as strange, as difficult. But remember, your silence is not an emptiness. It is a reservoir. One day it will speak louder than anything they have ever heard. Do not be afraid to name the things that matter, especially when they try to hide." Those words echoed in Arthur's mind when he received a second envelope sent by express delivery. Inside was a USB drive. It came with a handwritten note: "Watch this, then decide who you truly trust." Arthur plugged the USB into his laptop. A blurry, shaky video appeared. It showed a hospital room, and a familiar figure was sitting in a wheelchair, head tilted to the side. It was Arthur right after the accident. And on the opposite side was Derek in a nurse's uniform talking to someone off camera. "If he signs this power of attorney," Derek's voice rang with smugness, "we will have 6 months of access before his board of directors intervenes. By then, everything will be buried. No one will be able to trace it." And then a cold, authoritative female voice spoke. "Do it. He's too busy surviving to notice." Arthur's fingers trembled. That voice, he had heard it before. It wasn't just a voice. It was a storm in his life. He replayed the video over and over again, until certainty took over him. It was Isabel. It turned out that Isabel was not just a mysterious ex. She had been playing both sides, using Derek and using him. She didn't want to help. She wanted to profit. She had sent this USB not to help Arthur, but to weaken Derek so she could be the only one with power on the chessboard. The truth hit Arthur like a blow. He had trusted her, if only for a moment. He had thought she wanted to make amends. But no, she only wanted power. Arthur met Ethan the next morning at a small diner. He slid the USB drive across the table and signed, "She was playing both sides, using Derek, using me." Ethan's jaw tightened. Do you want to go public with this? Arthur shook his head. No. Then what? Ethan asked, confused. Arthur wrote on another piece of paper. The truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it has to be surgical, silent, and precise. We won't destroy her. We will end her power. Ethan understood. No scandals, no courts. Just silence. Just doors that would never open for Isabel again. And that's what they did. Within a week, every partnership Isabel had established under her new nonprofit organization was cut off. Anonymous tip-off letters, bank audits, secret calls from donors. They all pointed to one name, Isabel. She had no idea where it was coming from, but she felt it a deadly silence. Sarah learned about it later. Arthur had told her everything. At first she was furious, not because Arthur had acted, but because she had trusted Isabel even for a moment. She had seen the weakness in Isabel's eyes, the regret. But it was just an act. She's family, Sarah whispered, staring at the ceiling. Even though it means nothing. Some people change, Arthur signed. Some people just dig deeper into who they really are. Sarah's voice broke. She used my daughter. Arthur reached out and took her hand. Lily is stronger than both of us, and she is not infected by their poison. Sarah nodded slowly, her anger giving way to sadness. But beneath the sadness, there was a determination. She doesn't need to know about this, she said. Not yet, Arthur agreed. Some truths are better left in silence, at least until the soul can bear them without shattering. That night, Arthur and Lily sat together on the truth chair he had finished. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship made of oak and walnut with a small drawer hidden under the armrest. Lily had placed a folded piece of paper inside. No one knew what it said. Arthur gently ran his hand over the grain of the wood. Lily looked up at him, blinking. Do you think people can really change? She asked. He thought for a long time. Then he signed, People can hide for a long time. But changing is harder. Changing is a choice, every single day. Some people do, some don't. Lily nodded as if she understood. Then without a word, she stood on her tiptoes and gave him a gentle kiss on the cheek. Good night, Mr. Vance. He watched her skip toward the sofa, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. Sarah turned off the lights. Arthur sat back in the truth chair, surrounded by silence wood and the echoes of names that no longer held power. The war was almost over, but one last part remained. One final ghost to face. Tomorrow he would write the letter that would end it all. Not for Isabel, not for Derek, but for himself. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of the penthouse, Arthur woke with a new sense of purpose. He had written the letter he had faced the demons of his past, and that had brought a peace he hadn't felt since the accident. However, that peace was not an act of surrender. It was the foundation for a new battle, one he was not fighting alone this time. He had told Sarah about his plan to build an art center for children. At first, Sarah was skeptical. She was used to empty promises and unfulfilled dreams. A space for kids like Lily, she asked, her eyes full of doubt. Not just for Lily. Arthur signed his fingers, moving slowly, deliberately. For all the kids like Lily, those who need a place to talk. Without words. That's when Sarah saw something she hadn't seen before. Arthur wasn't just trying to do a good thing. He was seeking redemption, not with the world, but with himself. He was building something he couldn't do for himself, a space for healing. The project was launched quickly, but discreetly. Arthur bought an old building in the Arts District, a place he had once intended to turn into a grand contemporary art gallery. But now it had a new purpose. He invited Sarah and Lily to be part of the design process. They transformed a derelict space into a fortress of silent voices. Lily drew the first designs with crayons, with rooms full of books, a garden with wind chimes, and a small stage for storytelling. But just like every good thing in Arthur's life, this project also attracted unwanted attention. Mr. Henderson, a former advisor on the board of Arthur's charitable foundation, paid him a visit. Henderson was a slick man, always with a smile on his face, but his eyes were cold. "I've heard about your new project, Arthur," Henderson said, his voice dripping with honey. "A wonderful thing. But are you sure it's wise to use foundation assets to build this alternative art center? We have other more profitable investments." Bet. Arthur knew Henderson wasn't just concerned about profits. He had long suspected that Henderson had been using his reputation and the foundation to carry out shady dealings. This meeting only confirmed it. He let Henderson talk, noting everything, and let his silence be a counterweight to Henderson's flowery words. When Henderson left, Arthur had all the information he needed. He immediately contacted Ethan. "Henderson has been embezzling funds," he signed with finality. "I need everything on him. Every transaction, every secret account, everything. He thinks I can't do anything because I can't speak. He's about to find out that my silence can break him." Ethan, who was by now very familiar with Arthur's requests, got to work. Meanwhile, Arthur and Sarah continued to build their fortress. They chose paint colors together, arranged furniture, and hung the first paintings. Every wall, every corner was imbued with sweat and affection. For the first time in years, Arthur felt like he was building something meaningful, not to make money, but to bring hope. They spent weeks working. Sarah, with Arthur's help, had quit her job at the restaurant. She had found her new purpose in managing the center. She told Arthur, "I've lived my whole life in fear, worrying about things I couldn't control. But now I'm building something for Lily's future, and I'm not afraid anymore." Arthur signed, "You have found your courage." When the center was nearing completion, Arthur received a message from Ethan. "It's done. Everything. Henderson has been exposed. He used your foundation's funds to buy real estate under shell companies. The press has the story." Arthur felt no triumph. He only felt empty. He had fought and won, but this victory brought no joy. It was simply the end of an unnecessary battle. The night before the grand opening, Arthur sat alone in the center, looking at the colorful paintings on the walls. He had invited Lily over. She sat down next to him on the small chair he had carved for her. It was the truth chair. "Are you sad?" Lily asked, her voice soft. Arthur shook his head. "No. I thought you would be happy because you won," she said. Arthur looked at Lily, and he signed with a sincerity he had never shown to anyone else. "Winning doesn't always bring happiness, but being here with you, that does." The next morning on opening day, there was no clamor, no reporters or media events, just family and friends. Lily, in her favorite yellow dress, held Arthur's hand, leading him around, showing him her drawings and those of the other children. Sarah stepped onto a small makeshift stage. She held a microphone, her voice shaky but full of emotion. "I'm not good at public speaking," she began. "I'm just a waitress. But tonight I want to thank someone." She turned to Arthur, her eyes glistening. "I want to thank a man who taught me that silence is not an absence. It is a presence. It is intentional. A man who taught me that silent people are not voiceless. They just speak in a different way. Mr. Vance, would you come up here?" Lily pulled on Arthur's hand, and he, for the first time without hesitation, walked onto the stage. Sarah handed him the microphone. He looked at it, an object he hadn't touched in 8 years. He could feel everyone watching him, waiting for something. And then, after a long moment, he raised the microphone to his mouth. His throat was tense, aching, but he did not back down. He spoke, his voice hoarse, raw, but full of power. "Thank you for listening," he said, just 4 words. The room fell silent for a second, and then a roar of applause erupted. It wasn't applause for a billionaire, but for a man who had found his voice. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, Arthur, Sarah, and Lily remained. Lily had fallen asleep on an armchair. Arthur and Sarah stood together, looking at the large painting they had completed together. It was a painting of a large tree, with hundreds of children's handprints, and underneath was the chair Arthur had carved. It was their symbol, their healing. Sarah touched his hand. "You changed our lives," she said. Arthur signed, "You let me." "But you also let us change yours," she said, looking at him. "And that's something not every man like you would allow." Arthur looked at her, and he knew she was right. He had opened himself up, let his wounds be seen, and let a little girl and a woman teach him how to live again. He hadn't just built an art center, he had built a family, and in the silence of that room, he had found something more valuable than any asset: peace of mind. After the emotional grand opening, Arthur Vance's life had entered a new chapter. He was no longer the reclusive man in his penthouse. Every morning, he woke with a purpose clearer than any financial report, a life built with smiles, crayon drawings, and whispered voices. He spent most of his time at the new art center, not as the founder, but as a participant. He helped Sarah with scheduling, played with the children, and sometimes he simply sat in a corner observing the magic the place created. Everything seemed to have found its balance, but Arthur knew that a story isn't truly over until all the chapters are written. Even though Derek and Isabel had been pushed back, he still felt an invisible tension. It wasn't a direct threat, but a sense of unease, an echo of betrayal that still lingered. He received a message from Ethan. Final word on Derek. He took the money and disappeared, left no trace. Isabel has also been completely isolated. Everyone knows what she did. Now she will never get the power she craved. Arthur felt a sense of relief, but not triumph. It was like finishing a long battle. The fatigue remains even after the enemy is gone. He had fought not to win, but to protect. And he had succeeded. Arthur and Sarah's lives began to naturally intertwine. They shared mundane moments, simple dinners at Sarah's apartment, late nights at the center, cleaning up together after the children had left. One evening, as Sarah was doing the dishes, she said, "I don't know what this is, you and me, you and Lily, but this is the first time in a long time that I haven't felt lonely." Arthur turned his hands suspended in midair. Then he signed slowly. "I don't want to protect you out of guilt or charity. I want to protect you because I care." Sarah touched his hand, her eyes glistening. "I know," she said. "And you don't always need to sign everything. I can feel what you mean." Arthur took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he tried to speak. His vocal cords tensed, his voice was raspy and awkward, but he managed to utter a single word: "Stay." Sarah's eyes widened. She didn't respond with words. She stepped forward slowly, wrapped her arms around him as if hugging a man made of glass, afraid he would shatter. But he didn't. He held her, and in that silence, Arthur Vance finally felt whole. The truth chair that Arthur had built for Lily became their symbol. It was placed in a special spot in the studio. Lily placed a folded piece of paper in the small drawer under the armrest, a secret only she knew. One evening, Lily sat in the chair and asked Arthur, "Do you think people can really change?" Arthur sat down next to her and signed, "People can hide for a long time, but changing is much harder. Changing is a choice, every day. Some people do, some don't." Lily nodded as if she understood. She stood on her tiptoes, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and whispered, "You're my tree." That phrase became a symbol for Arthur. It wasn't just a saying, it was the truth. He had become a solid foundation, a safe place for Lily. He had learned that his true legacy was not the skyscrapers, but a space where silent voices were heard, where broken hearts were mended. One morning, Arthur, Sarah, and Lily took a walk together in the park. Lily ran everywhere, her laughter echoing through the space. An elderly woman who seemed to be a friend of Sarah's approached her and said, "She told me about her billionaire friend. She said Mr. Vance helped her find her heart's voice." Sarah looked at Arthur, and her eyes were full of gratitude. "You did that, Arthur," she said. Arthur just smiled, not replying. He knew that this change wasn't his doing. He was only a part of it. The healing came from Lily, from Sarah's courage, and from his own desire to heal. Their lives continued. The art center grew, becoming a true fortress for the community. Every painting, every sculpture, every smile from a child was a testament to the existence of kindness, perseverance, and hope. And then one day Arthur did something he had never done. He sat before his grand piano in the penthouse, the chair he had carved for Lily placed beside it. He placed his fingers on the keys, and for the first time in years, he played. Not grand symphonies, but a simple, gentle melody. The tune filled the room, a wordless song, a symphony of healing. That was when Arthur Vance understood that silence was not emptiness. It was a space, a place to listen to the most important things. And sometimes, the best songs, the most beautiful stories, come from the quietest places. And so Arthur Vance's journey concludes not with a resounding victory, but with a quiet healing. From a man trapped in his own silence, he learned how to listen, how to love, and most importantly, how to find his true voice again. Sometimes the most meaningful connections don't come from grand words, but from a crayon, a small chair, or a heartfelt hug. If this story touched your heart, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think truly changed Arthur Vance? Was it Lily's innocence that taught him that life isn't about what we own, but about the feelings we share? Remember, sometimes the best music comes from the quietest places. Thank you for watching.